Hi, C students. This is Dennis. I am in the middle of grading the assignment 6 and saw all kinds of different submissions and some major issues throughout. So I just thought I would handle this with this video so you all can just compare what you did to what I did. So let's look at the assignment. The assignment requires you to create a struct for date and a struct for person. Person has to be a composite struct, which consists of a date field. Then create three variables of type person, and then populate these. Everything has to be done in the function, kind of what it says here. And your output needs to be a nice formatted output in the function. And basically everything needs to be validated. Your dates need to be validated, taking consideration the number of months, the month number, make sure everything's numbers, not letters, make sure you handle leap year, and so on. The person's name needs to be in sentence case. Genders cannot be anything but M, F, or O. And the income must be a number, not a letter, between 0 and a million. I don't know why, but no design tools needed. So let's go look at some. So before I actually look at code, I just want to do a couple runs. Here's what the user sees when they run my program. It says entering the first person. Next time it'll say the second and the third and the fourth and so on. And yes, it will say second, third, and fourth, not ST. Enter the full name. So not enter first, then middle, then last, but enter the full name. So my full name is that with no spaces. Notice I just changed my case up. The next thing it says is enter the date as MMDD year. So if I enter a date as this, it should yell at me, and it does. It says like this. So I enter the date as this. It should yell at me because of my month. So I'm checking the month. If I enter the date as this, hopefully it'll recognize this is a leap year, and it says the date must be less than 30. So notice 29 would be legal. And if I enter this, which is not a leap year, it says it has to be less than 29. And if I enter this, I don't know, something like that, it should yell, the date and month have to be numbers, not letters. So finally I'll enter a valid date, and that's what my date validation does. So my valid date is going to be 5. I'll do one more after this. So I'm past the date. And I'm just going to stop this program and run it one more time. I want to show you something else in my date. And my last thing I want to show you in my date is if I enter 8 period 09 anything as a separator 1987, it works. So even though I say I need these slashes, I just need something to separate other than a space my parts of my date. So it doesn't yell at me. It's going to be 8987. All right, so when I enter the gender, if I enter a number, it says must be MFO. If I enter something other than MFO, it must be MFO. And as long as I enter an M, F, or O, it doesn't matter the case, it'll accept it. On the income, if I type in letters, it says must be a number. If I type in something less than 0, it yells at me. And obviously, if I type something above a million, it would yell at me. So here's my output. It says person 1 of 1, the person's name, nice in sentence case, the date, the gender. Notice the gender doesn't say M, it says male, and there's my annual income. Would I like to enter another person? Sure. Entering that second person, and whatever I type, there's my first person, there's my second, and as I add, I'll do, notice, let's do another one. Enter the third, that says RD. Oops, can't have 32 days. I expected that. And then the letter, and then some kind of income. And there's 1, 2, 3. And if I want to enter another one, it's going to say enter, let's see, the fourth person, and so on. So this will be my last guy. And I put a tab in there, which is kind of funky, but I think it'll still work. Oh, good. I'm glad it didn't. Oh, it did work as far as the name, but the date, I forgot to put 2 digits for everything. And the letter and the income. And there's that stupid tab. That's okay, because that's what I said was part of the name. So I can continue this until I reach exceed the size of my array. I'm going to say no, and I'm going to be done. So let's take a look at my code. Always have a comment header. Notice my includes are my user-defined data types. I have my typical template, which looks like this. And then I have my date checker, which has all the code that checks a date. Eventually, I'm going to maybe take my name part out of this because name's very common and include name checker. I didn't do that yet, but I should. And in my future lives of programs, I can drop in name checker, date checker, maybe address checker, and I never have to write the code again. So here's my functions in main, which is add a person, display a person, get the gender, get the name, and shift right. There are other functions over here that you could see if you go here. I'm sorry, here. So there's some more prototype functions and so on. So my program begins inside of a do while loop. There's that again. Oh, by the way, before I do that, let me just show you my struct. There's my struct for a person, and by the way, date has the struct for a date. So everything that belongs to a date should be in this date checker. So I move the struct there so I don't have to do it in person. So anywhere that I would have a date, I'm all set up. So back in here, and that date that came from this date checker, I could use that as a data field. So here I am inside of my loop, and the first thing I do is add a person. And again, there's a million ways to write this. The first thing I do is I make sure there's enough room, and all of this code, and I probably should have put a comment, is just so that I can display this message, and that would be first, second, third, or fourth, first, second, third, or fourth, and after the third, everything ends in a TH. So I pass in my array. By the way, I did use an array of people instead of variable 1, 2, and 3, and I pass in my e-size. You could have done this in 3 variables, doesn't matter. So I pass in my array, and I take my name portion of the current element, and I populate the name, then I populate the date, gender, and income. So to populate the name, that would be right here. I come in, I ask them for their full name. I notice a lot of you say enter the first name, then the middle initial, then the last name. That's not kind of what I wanted in the other assignment. I just wanted to enter your name, and then you could prompt them. So I convert everything to lowercase, then I take the first letter of the first of the name and uppercase it, and then in here is some, I don't know if you want to call it clever code, but basically, I am taking after the first name, looking for the first space, and I am then looking ahead to see if there's a period or not, and if not, I'm assigning a period. So I may or may not need to insert a period. It depends if one's there or not. And this little guy here, if I'm going to insert a period, shifts everything to the right and allows me to have space to do it. So after my name, my date of birth, let me show you my date. I'm sorry. Let's go back up here. So I'm going to add a person, and the first thing I do is I get the name, but here's get the date. So let's go to my date checker. In my date checker, there's where I said I have a struct. I have 2 functions that anyone that includes my date checker routine will have access to both of these functions, and that is get a date and, I'm sorry, three functions: get a date, get next, which is just a part of this, and then display date. By the way, you don't have to prototype if everything is lined up inside of your separate header file, but I probably should have prototyped this just to be consistent, but it doesn't matter either way. So if I was to prototype that, it would look just like that on my display date. So my display date is just formatting a date, which would be MMs/DDs/year. And notice I'm putting those zeros where they belong, if necessary. As far as get a date, these defaults don't matter. I do like a flag, and anything I do, I like to put in a do while loop for my validation. So the first thing I do is I throw these flags to no and leap year to no, and I ask them to enter a string. I don't say enter a string, I say enter date, but I want it to look like this. And the first thing I do, my first error checking, is if that length of that string is not 10, if it's less than 10, they did not follow this rule. And I just tell them, hey, you got to do it again. So I keep them in this loop until they enter me a length of 10. Here's a function, and it's called ATOI, and I've added some functions into my companion website under strings, or you can Google this, and what this guy does is it parses off the first part of any string, which are numeric. So that gets me my month. The next thing I do is I call this function called get next twice. Once gets me my day, once gets me my year. And all that's doing as far as get next is it is looking for it's parsing the string, and it's moving past each part of where the date would be. So it knows the month is in the first two, it knows the day is past the /, and so on. So that's what this guy's doing. And when it's all said and done, I will have my month, my day, and my year populated as integers. Now I can validate now that I have that. So the first thing I'm validating is year, and I just made up this rule that I'll accept any year except things less than 1500. And I come down and I determine whether it's a leap year or not, and I'm going to let you Google it, but to determine a leap year, you need that code at minimum to determine a leap year. So I don't write the rules of leap year, but that does follow the rules of setting up a leap year. So at the end of lines 53 through 56, I know whether or not it's a leap year. So now I know that I have a valid month between 1 and 12, and based on if it's one of these months, then these months all have 31 days in them. So I check to make sure that the day, if it's one of these months, is between 0, not less than. Actually, I should have said 1, but oh well. So less than 1 is what I should have said here. Not a big deal. And I should have said less than 1 here. My bad. But here I say greater than 31. So it better be 1 or greater. Can't be less than 1. And if it's above 31, it's invalid. So I do that for all of these months, all at one time. Here's my special case. It's February, and first thing I do in February is I check to see if it's leap year or not. If it is, then there's 29 days possible, and if it's not, then there's 28 days possible. So all of that is handled here, and if it's none of these or not February, then it's the months that have 30 days in them, and this handles it right here. I will tell you that if somebody enters a number or a letter for a month, at the end of this, the days are going to equal one of these guys, and that would become invalid. So at the very end, month, day, or day, month, and year, or month, day, and year will all be valid, and I will assign to my date struct those values. Otherwise, I continue in this loop until, actually I could have assigned those outside, but that's okay. I will loop again if anything's not valid. I think that's pretty much this entire program, is it not? Display, you could figure that out, and so on. So I think that's all I want to say. I've been rambling on for 15 minutes, which is at least 5 minutes too long. So hopefully you got assignment 6 done, and hopefully you understand it. Good luck.